My name is Shahar Gindi, and this is a presentation that Hisherik and myself gave at the International Association of Intercultural Relations Conference in Rapperswil, Switzerland in July 2020. The title of the presentation is "We Were Not Even Trained to Have an Opinion: Political Socialization of Palestinian Teachers in Jewish Schools." So political socialization is basically the process whereby you become a citizen in your country. You develop your understanding of what kind of views and aspirations you have. You define your political identity and your role within the country that you live in. And there are two main paradigms within within the political socialization literature. The first is the early years of life hypothesis that emphasizes as the title says, early years of life, meaning that as a child you develop your identity as a citizen, while the continuous socialization hypothesis emphasizes more what happens ongoing in your life. But still, it should be mentioned that the second hypothesis really pays a lot of attention to significant events such as the JFK murder, 9/11, Yitzhak Rabin's murder, and not really continuously socializing and continuously developing. The background of this presentation is we're talking about Israel. Israel is defined as a Jewish and democratic state, which has implications to the status of minorities. And the biggest minority is, of course, the Arab minority, which constitutes 20% of the country and is discriminated against. It can be called the Palestinian citizens of Israel or the Arab citizens of Israel, depending on how you look at it. And the specific context that we're looking at is Arab teachers who choose to teach in Jewish schools. It's quite a unique phenomenon. We're talking about 1,000 to 2,000 teachers out of about 200,000 teachers altogether in Israel. So it's quite a unique and also quite novel phenomenon only in the last 12 years or so. So we really looked at these teachers and how they change as a result of their entering a Jewish school. And we interviewed 10 teachers, 9 women and 1 man who teach in Jewish schools. We had very prolonged, semi-structured interviews with them ranging from 2 to 4 hours. And we asked them about their childhood, about their political socialization, about their family, about their school, and all the way to their entering Jewish schools and working there. 4th main themes were conceptualized in the qualitative analysis, and they are the early political socialization, the early adult life, entering a Jewish school, and the mechanism of change, and I'm going to talk about each one in turn. The first theme, the early political socialization, had to do with the culture of silence. So all teachers were talking about the fact that they were socialized to not talk about politics, that this is not something that one should talk about, and that even when it was discussed, it was really more of a statement and not a discussion. And this was true for the families they grew up in, the schools that they were taught in, and the youth movements, and so on. And as they enter early adult life, they don't talk politics, so that shouldn't be too surprising given the culture of silence. So, for example, we have this interviewee saying, "I'm just voting, I'm not talking politics, I'm not interested anymore, nothing comes of it. I do not believe in them, in the politicians, but at least we will have a voice." So it's a very narrow kind of view of participation within society. And as they enter the school, we start to see changes. But at first, they come and there's an initial silence. So, for example, Amira says during the election period, there was talk of only of what party the parents were voting for, but not the essence of it. There was a lot of talk in the teacher's room. I did not participate, only listened. Neither did they ask me, no one. When talking about politics, I play with my phone, but my ears are open to listening. If I raise my head, I may be asked. I don't want to reach places where there is a tension between Jews and Arabs. So we can really see how this socialization in early childhood impacted the way that they entered. So, in addition to the fact that they were cultured in a culture of silence and are now within a school and don't want to talk, when they do talk, they find the Jewish teachers enforcing silence again. So, for example, Rada says, I once said that the Jews in Katsir were on the town of Arara, and after the state was established, they built it. The racist teacher, so she's referring to the teacher she already talked about in the interview and doesn't like very much. The racist teacher said that soon Arara would infiltrate Katsir. I said it was originally Arara's lands. She said, stop whining, in front of the other teachers. None of the teachers said anything. I blushed. I felt I wanted to say things, but I couldn't. So as these teachers enter the Jewish schools, they start to reflect about their socialization, comparing it with the kids that they see at the Jewish schools. So, for example, Riba says, I have no recollection that we talked, we studied, we came back home. We were not even trained to have an opinion. I do not see it in the Arab schools today either. Learn the content, learn the curriculum, and that is it, disabling the thinking. And so the next theme is mechanisms of change. So the first mechanism of change is mere contact. So for example, Wadida says, you're at the school for many hours, people with different positions, you learn that they love you, that they can love you. I've never been with Jews for so many hours, people who believe you exist, that you have a history too. It's not easy, we know. You couldn't be here. So slowly, as these teachers are at the Jewish school, they become more political. As Aisha says, at first I was angry that in team meetings they were talking about politics and I was not talking. I started reading and talking and learning the subject. Elections are felt in the school, talking about it in the classroom, asking the students what they choose, and also how the others think in Israel, how the others feel. Working in schools has made me more political because I'm part of the school. Before, I never talked about politics. Not at home, not at the teacher training college. It was my first time. The teachers also become more critical. They become more critical towards their own community as well. So, for example, Wadida tries to convince her teacher to go to a psychologist, and she feels that she's saying to her sister, "Who is this snob who talks to us like that?" So she feels that she comes from the Jewish society with her recommendations, and she just feels that she's being a snob. So I tell them not to give their children phones, and they all reject me, Wadida says. And another thing that we have to bear in mind is that many of these teachers still feel pretty desperate about the situation. So, for example, Bahar said, there is basically no democracy. You feel financially well off, freedom of movement in the statements, and freedom in daily life, but we are oppressed. As long as there are no common schools and no closeness from young age, the situation will get worse, and the solution is farther away. Education has to start by educating for togetherness. From the beginning, education is very racist and deceiving. It presents the picture it wants and not the real one. And there were some teachers who expressed cautious optimism. So, for example, Wadida said, I keep thinking about how the students will grow up and become soldiers and remember their Arab teacher. It's exciting and painful. What would happen if they met their Arab teacher as soldiers? I've always tried to do my best so they will remember that Arabs are like the teacher who taught them. So the first finding has to do with the political socialization of Arabs in Israel, the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And we can learn something that is more general about the way that they are taught to be silent. This is something that helps the majority group. The majority group does not want any Arab uh, independence within Israel. They are always weary of the fact that the Arabs in Israel um, um, will join the Arab enemies that Israel has. So keeping the Arab minority um, silent about political matter is the majority's sort of interest, and we can learn that about the Arab minority from the interviews with the teachers. Moreover, we can learn that the political socialization is an ongoing process, so that the teachers do change when they are within a Jewish school, when they see the different culture, when they see that people do to talk more about politics, and so they become more political. So these findings are congruent with what we know from previous studies about political minorities, uh, especially when they feel oppressed. They do not feel that they're part of the country. They do not feel part of the political system, and so they are quite alienated from political processes and from electoral processes. And we know this about the Arab minority in Israel. So we can see this process with teachers after their initial socialization of being silent about political matters. They go into the Jewish schools. They see something different within the political culture, and they start to reflect on their socialization, and they start to change. And the mere contact with Jews has a lot to do with that, but also the institutional control. We see that a lot of the time the Jewish teachers also act as enforcers. But overall, once they go through this process, we can see them becoming more political, more critical towards the state of Israel in general and towards their community as well. Some of them do display despair, but some display cautious optimism as well. So the findings really show that you cannot be apolitical. Everything is political. Schools are political. Teachers are political creatures. And this attempt to sterilize the schools, sterilize the Arab teachers are futile. And it will be much more important to train them, to train teachers in general, to train Arab teachers going into Arab schools, Arab teachers going into Jewish schools, to know about politics, to know how to conduct a political discussion, first of all among their peers and then with their students, because that will make their students also more critical citizens within a democratic society. And this should be also a large focus when it comes to um, Arab teachers who go to teach in Jewish schools. So thank you for listening.